The autumn sky was turning a soft orange as State Senator James Mitchell drove his silver sit-in down Pine Valley Road. The community meeting about youth education had run longer than expected, but he didn't mind. These face-to-face conversations with his constituents were what he lived for. The smell of fresh coffee from his travel mug filled the car as he hummed along to an old jazz tune, his mind still processing the passionate discussions from the evening. His peaceful drive was interrupted by the sudden flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Mitchell checked his speedometer. He was going exactly at the limit. Years of public service had taught him to stay extra careful about these things. Still, he did what every citizen should, pulled over safely, turned off the engine, and placed his hands where they would be visible on the steering wheel. Through his side mirror, he watched the police officer approach. Something felt off about the way the officer walked. There was an unusual aggression in his stride that made Mitchell's stomach tighten. He'd been in politics long enough to trust his instincts. Officer Derek Rayner's flashlight beam cut through Mitchell's window with unnecessary intensity, dancing across the senator's face and the car's interior. "License and registration," he barked, without any greeting or explanation for the stop. Mitchell noticed how the officer's hand rested on his holster, a subtle but clear message. "Good evening, officer," Mitchell responded calmly, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "I'm reaching for my wallet in my jacket pocket, and then I'll get the registration from the glove compartment." He narrated his movements clearly, a habit he developed over years of similar encounters. "I don't need a play-by-play," Rayner snapped. "Just hurry up and get them." The hostility in his voice was unmistakable. As Mitchell carefully retrieved his identification, he was thankful for the decision he'd made 6 months ago to install dashboard cameras in his car. It had seemed paranoid at the time, but after hearing countless stories from his constituents about troubling traffic stops, he decided it was better to be safe than sorry. "Sir, I'm State Senator James Mitchell," he said politely, handing over his license and registration. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" The officer's response came with a sneer. "Oh, a senator, huh? Well, your kind of people always think titles make you special. I pulled you over because your tire crossed the yellow line back there." Mitchell knew he'd done no such thing. He'd been driving perfectly. He also knew exactly what the officer meant by "your kind of people." The comment hung in the air like heavy smoke. The senator's phone sat silently in his cup holder, recording every second of the interaction. His dashboard cameras whirred quietly, their tiny red lights hidden from view. Little did Officer Rayner know, his every word and action was being documented from multiple angles. Mitchell could feel his heart pounding, but his voice remained steady. Years of public speaking helped him maintain his composure. "Officer, I'm certain I maintained my lane properly. If you have dash cam footage of the violation, I'd be happy to review it." The officer's grip tightened on his flashlight. The beam jerked erratically across Mitchell's face. "Are you calling me a liar, sir?" Rayner's emphasis on the word "sir" made it sound like an insult. "Step out of the vehicle." As Mitchell reached for his seatbelt, he silently thanked his years of experience in staying calm under pressure. What was about to unfold in the next few minutes would not only change his life, but would pull back the curtain on decades of hidden injustice in the local police department. This routine traffic stop on a quiet Sunday evening was about to become the catalyst for one of the most significant police reform movements in the state's history. But for now, all Senator Mitchell could do was breathe deeply and prepare himself for what was coming next. The truth about what happened that night might have been lost forever if it wasn't for the 3 small cameras hidden throughout Senator Mitchell's car. He had them installed after listening to countless stories from community members about unfair treatment during traffic stops. One camera was cleverly placed near the rear-view mirror, another in the back window, and a third one perfectly positioned to capture the driver's side window interactions. When Mitchell first had them installed, his staff thought he was being overly cautious. "It seems a bit much," his assistant had said while watching the technician work. But Mitchell remembered what his father always told him. Better to have something and not need it, than need it and not have it. Tonight, those words would prove more valuable than ever. The cameras were so well hidden that most people wouldn't notice them even if they were looking. They were small, black, and blended perfectly with the car's interior. Each one was connected to a special recording system that automatically uploaded footage to a secure cloud server every few minutes. Mitchell had made sure the system was completely legal and met all state requirements for recording devices in private vehicles. As Officer Rayner stood by the car, demanding Mitchell step out, none of the cameras made a sound. They silently captured everything. The officer's aggressive stance, his hand hovering near his weapon, and most importantly, his words. The audio quality was crystal clear, picking up every subtle tone and hidden meaning in the officer's voice. But there was something else these cameras caught, something that would later become crucial evidence. In the reflection of Mitchell's car window, captured by the side camera, Officer Rayner's body camera light wasn't blinking. It should have been recording, according to department policy, but it was clearly turned off. This small detail would later raise serious questions about the officer's intentions that night. The backseat camera also captured something interesting. Through the rear window, it recorded two other police cars quietly pulling up and parking some distance behind, their lights off. Why would a simple traffic stop need 3 police cars? The footage showed the officers in these cars staying inside their vehicles, watching and waiting, as if they knew something was about to happen. What made the camera system truly special was its automatic backup feature. Even if the cameras were discovered and destroyed, the footage would already be safe in the cloud. Mitchell had specifically requested this feature, knowing how easily evidence could disappear in sensitive situations. One of the cameras also picked up something that almost everyone missed at night, a small gesture that would become important later. Just before approaching Mitchell's car, Officer Rayner had made a quick call on his personal phone, not his police radio. The camera's microphone barely picked up his words. "Yeah, I got one. You were right about the route he'd take." The dashboard camera facing forward captured the entire scene in its wide-angle view. It showed clearly that Mitchell's car had never crossed the yellow line as accused. In fact, his driving had been perfectly centered in the lane the entire time. This would become crucial evidence later, proving the traffic stop had no legitimate basis. Through the camera's lenses, every detail was preserved. The way Mitchell's hands stayed visible on the steering wheel, how he spoke calmly and respectfully despite the officer's growing aggression, and most importantly, how Officer Rayner's behavior changed the moment he realized Mitchell was a state senator. As tensions rose outside the car, these silent witnesses kept recording. They captured the slight tremble in Mitchell's voice as he reached for his seatbelt, the reflection of the officer's flashlight beam bouncing off nearby trees, and even a passing car that slowed down to watch the scene unfold. Every second was being documented, creating an undeniable record of what was about to become a historic encounter. What Officer Rayner didn't know was that his next actions wouldn't just be witnessed by the few people present. They would eventually be seen by millions, sparking a conversation that could no longer be ignored. The truth was being recorded in high definition, and no amount of police reports or altered testimonies could change what these cameras were about to capture. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife as Senator Mitchell slowly stepped out of his car. The evening had grown darker, and the red and blue lights from the police cars painted everything in eerie colors. Despite the cool night air, small beads of sweat formed on his forehead. 20 years in politics had taught him how to handle tough situations, but this felt different. "Hands where I can see them," Officer Rayner barked, his flashlight beam following Mitchell's every move. The senator complied, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He could feel his heart pounding against his chest, but his face remained calm. Years of public service had taught him that showing fear often made things worse. "Officer," Mitchell started, his voice steady despite the situation, "I want to understand what's happening here. You said I crossed a yellow line, but I know that's not true." Is there something else going on? The response came fast and harsh. Turn around and face your vehicle, Rayner commanded, completely ignoring the question. The two other police cars remained parked in the distance, their occupants watching silently. The whole scene felt staged, like a trap that had been waiting to spring. As Mitchell faced his car, he noticed his own reflection in the window. He saw a man in a neat suit, hands raised, being treated like a criminal. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. Just an hour ago, he had been discussing education reform with community leaders. Spread your legs, Rayner ordered, moving closer. You know, being a senator doesn't put you above the law. His tone dripped with contempt. I've dealt with plenty of your type trying to pull rank. Mitchell took a deep breath before responding. Officer Rayner, I understand you're doing your job. But I need to point out that your body camera isn't on, and this stop appears to have no valid reason. I'd like to contact my lawyer. That's when things escalated. Officer Rayner stepped uncomfortably close, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Oh, so now you're a lawyer too. Let me tell you something. Out here, on the law. Your fancy title doesn't mean anything on these streets. Inside the car, the cameras continued their silent work, capturing every word, every movement, every abuse of power. The side camera caught Officer Rayner's hand tightening on his belt, near his weapon. A subtle act of intimidation that would later become crucial evidence. I'm going to search your vehicle, Rayner announced, not asking for permission. And if I find anything at all, your next public appearance will be in court. Mitchell stood firm, though his legs felt weak. Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. There's no probable cause, and I know my rights. The officer's laugh was cold and hollow. Rights? Let me educate you about rights. He reached for his handcuffs. Put your hands behind your back. You're interfering with a police investigation. At that moment, Mitchell's phone in the car continued recording, picking up a radio conversation from one of the other police cars. Is he still giving you trouble? Need us to come up there? The casual nature of the question suggested this wasn't a random encounter. Mitchell remained composed, even as the cold metal of the handcuffs touched his wrists. He knew every second was being recorded. Every violation of his rights, every abuse of power, every moment of this orchestrated harassment was being preserved. My name is State Senator James Mitchell, he stated clearly, knowing the cameras would pick up his words. I want to officially record that I'm being detained without probable cause, that Officer Rayner's body camera is off, and that this entire stop appears to be premeditated harassment. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Officer Rayner paused for a split second, perhaps realizing for the first time that he might have underestimated his target. But it was too late to back down now. What happened in the next few minutes would not only change both their lives, but would become the spark that lit a fire of reform across the entire state. In the distance, cars drove past, their headlights briefly illuminating the scene, an elected official in handcuffs, a power-drunk officer, and two backup cars waiting in the shadows. None of them knew that this moment was being captured from multiple angles, that truth was being recorded in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. The morning after the incident, Senator Mitchell sat in his office, his untouched coffee growing cold. His wrists still showed faint marks from the handcuffs, but the real wounds weren't physical. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Calls from concerned colleagues, community leaders, and reporters who had somehow caught wind of the incident. We need to file a formal complaint, his legal advisor said, spreading papers across the desk. But there's something you should see first. She opened her laptop, showing Mitchell several social media posts. Other people had started coming forward with similar stories about Officer Rayner. What had seemed like an isolated incident was unraveling into something much bigger. A young reporter from the City Times newspaper had already connected the dots between 12 similar incidents involving Officer Rayner in the past year alone. All the cases followed a disturbing pattern. traffic stops with questionable reasons, conveniently malfunctioning body cameras, and clear signs of harassment. "Look at this," the legal advisor pointed to her screen. 2 months ago, a high school teacher was stopped by Rayner on the same road. Same excuse about crossing the yellow line. When she filed a complaint, it mysteriously disappeared from the system. The similarities were too obvious to ignore. The senator's office began receiving emails and calls from other victims. A local business owner shared dashcam footage of his encounter with Rayner 3 weeks earlier. A college professor had written documentation of a similar stop last month. Each story added another piece to a troubling puzzle. Mitchell's team discovered something even more concerning: a pattern of buried complaints. They found that over 30 formal complaints against Officer Rayner had been filed in the past 5 years. Somehow, all of them had been dismissed or had vanished into the bureaucratic void. Someone in the department was protecting him. The police department's internal affairs office claimed they had no record of any serious complaints against Officer Rayner. "He's a decorated officer with a clean record," they insisted. But Mitchell's team had already begun gathering evidence that told a very different story. A retired police clerk reached out confidentially. "I saw it happening for years," she wrote in an email. "Complaints would come in, and within days they'd be gone. Someone high up was making them disappear." She was willing to testify, but feared retaliation. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Mitchell's team received an anonymous USB drive. It contained spreadsheets tracking police stops in the district over the past 3 years. The data showed that Officer Rayner's traffic stops followed a clear pattern of targeting specific groups. The numbers were impossible to explain away as coincidence. "This goes deeper than one officer," Mitchell told his staff during an emergency meeting. "This is about a system that's protecting bad behavior." The evidence was pointing to a culture of cover-ups within the department, reaching all the way to the top. Local community groups began organizing peaceful gatherings to share their stories. The meetings, held in church basements and community centers, drew crowds of people who had stayed silent for years. Each person who stood up to speak revealed another instance of harassment, another case of justice denied. Mitchell's office created a secure online forum where people could safely share their experiences. Within days, they received over 100 responses. The stories painted a picture of systematic harassment that had gone unchecked for years. Some people had video evidence, others had written records, and many had witnesses willing to come forward. A breakthrough came when a current police department employee, who asked to remain anonymous, confirmed that there was an unofficial policy to protect certain officers. "They call themselves the Old Guard," the insider revealed. "They look out for their own, no matter what they do." As Mitchell reviewed the mounting evidence, he realized this had become much more than a personal incident. His traffic stop had cracked open a door that had been kept firmly shut for years. Behind it lay a story of institutional corruption that needed to be exposed. The senator looked at the growing stack of testimonies on his desk. Each page represented someone who had faced similar treatment, but hadn't had the resources or platform to fight back. Now their stories would finally be heard. The question wasn't just about one bad officer anymore. It was about changing an entire system that had failed its community. The police department's darkest secrets began unraveling like a loose thread on an old sweater. 2 weeks after Senator Mitchell's traffic stop, his team discovered something that made their blood run cold. In a dusty storage room of the city records building, they found boxes of misplaced complaint files. These weren't just random papers. They were carefully hidden evidence of years of police misconduct. "You need to see this," Mitchell's assistant said, placing a thick folder on his desk one morning. Inside were photos of Officer Rayner at private meetings with senior police officials dating back 5 years. These weren't ordinary departmental meetings. They were held at remote locations, off the books, always after hours. The team brought in a data analyst to review police reports from the past decade. The patterns were shocking. Certain officers, including Rayner, had an unusual number of complaints that disappeared within days of being filed. Even more disturbing, these same officers were regularly promoted and given special assignments. They called themselves the Guardians, revealed a former police dispatcher who came forward. Her hands shook as she spoke. They protected their own, made sure certain officers stayed out of trouble. If you spoke up, bad things happened to your career. She had kept quiet for years, afraid of losing her pension. The department's internal computer system told its own story. Every time someone filed a complaint against one of the Guardians, the file would be marked for special review. Within 48 hours, it would vanish from the system. No trace, no record, like it never happened. A night shift IT worker finally exposed how they did it. They had a special code in the computer system, he explained. When they entered this code, it would automatically delete certain records and create fake backup files showing nothing was ever there. He had discovered this by accident and had been too scared to report it. The corruption went beyond just hiding complaints. These officers had created their own unofficial power structure within the department. They controlled assignments, promotions, and transfers. Good officers who tried to report wrongdoing found themselves stuck on midnight shifts in the worst parts of town. It was like a secret club, said a retired officer who had watched it all happen. If you weren't part of their group, you couldn't move up. If you spoke against them, your career was over. He had kept detailed notes over the years, hiding them in his garage, waiting for the right moment to share them. Mitchell's team uncovered a pattern in traffic stop locations too. Officers like Rayner weren't randomly pulling people over. They were strategically targeting certain neighborhoods and communities. They had even created unofficial hunting grounds, where they knew complaints would be less likely to be believed. The evidence kept mounting. Security camera footage from local businesses showed officers meeting late at night in empty parking lots, exchanging documents, planning their next moves. These weren't chance meetings. They were coordinating their actions, making sure their stories matched. A breakthrough came when they found Officer Rayner's old partner, now retired and living in another state. I couldn't sleep at night, he admitted. I watched them build this system for years. They started small, fixing tickets for friends, making minor complaints disappear. But it grew into something ugly, something dangerous. The department's training records revealed another layer of corruption. New officers were carefully watched and tested. Those who showed willingness to play along were mentored by senior members of the group. Those who questioned things found themselves failing their probationary period for mysterious reasons. Mitchell sat in his office late one night, reviewing the evidence. His computer screen showed dozens of similar cases across the state, all following the same pattern. This wasn't just about one traffic stop or one corrupt officer. It was about a carefully built system designed to protect those who abused their power. Text messages recovered from department phones painted an even clearer picture. Officers coordinated their stops, warned each other about internal investigations, and shared tips on which complaints needed to disappear. They operated like a well-oiled machine, each person playing their part in keeping the truth hidden. People need to know about this, Mitchell told his team. But he also knew that exposing the truth would shake the entire department to its core. Some of these officers had been in power for decades. They had friends in high places, connections throughout the city. Taking them on wouldn't just be difficult, it would be dangerous. The afternoon sun streamed through the blinds of Senator Mitchell's office when Officer Lisa Thompson walked in. Her hands were shaking as she placed a thick brown envelope on his desk. "I can't be quiet anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What they're doing, it's destroying everything we're supposed to stand for." As a 12-year veteran of the police force, Officer Thompson had seen it all from the inside. She wasn't just any officer. She worked in the records department, where she had access to the truth that others tried so hard to hide. For years, she had watched silently as good officers were pushed out and complaints disappeared. "They made me do it," she explained, pulling documents from the envelope. "Every Friday, I had to sort through the complaint files. Any report against certain officers had to be marked with a special red stamp. By Monday morning, those files would be gone. Her eyes welled up with tears as she spoke. The documents she brought were damning. Internal memos, official reports with unofficial corrections, and lists of officers who were untouchable. Officer Rayner's name appeared repeatedly, always connected to incidents that mysteriously vanished from official records. "There's more," she said, pulling out her phone. She played a recording from a department meeting where senior officers openly discussed how to handle complaints. Their casual tone, all plotting to hide misconduct, was chilling. They talked about it like it was just another day at the office. Thompson had kept a secret diary of everything she witnessed. January 15th. 3 complaints against Rayner disappeared. February 3rd. Good officer transferred after reporting misconduct. March 10th. Witnessed intimidated into changing statement. The entries went on, painting a picture of systematic corruption. "I'm risking everything by being here," she said, her voice steadier now. "But after seeing what happened to you, Senator, I knew it was time. They've gone too far." She explained how officers like Rayner would target people they thought wouldn't or couldn't fight back. The most shocking revelation came when Thompson shared the department's unofficial training manual. A document passed around by the corrupt officers teaching new recruits how to avoid getting caught. It included tips on disabling body cameras, writing reports to justify unnecessary stops, and handling complaints. "Watch this," she said, pulling up security footage on her laptop. The video showed Officer Rayner and others in the evidence room carefully removing papers from files. This is how they cleaned up after themselves. "They thought nobody was watching, but I made sure the cameras were always running." Thompson had also saved hundreds of emails that higher-ups thought were deleted. Messages discussing which officers needed protection, which complaints needed to go away, and how to deal with anyone who tried to expose the truth. The casual way they discussed destroying people's lives was horrifying. "Last month, they started getting nervous," she continued. "After your incident, Senator, they knew something big might happen. They've been working overtime to cover their tracks." She showed recent photos of officers burning documents behind the station late at night. The risk Thompson was taking was enormous. "They know where I live," she said quietly. "They know about my family. But I can't let them keep doing this." Her courage in coming forward would later inspire others to do the same. What made her evidence so powerful was its completeness. She hadn't just saved random documents. She had systematically gathered proof of years of corruption. Times, dates, names, places. Everything needed to prove what was happening beyond any doubt. "I want to be clear about something," Thompson said as she stood to leave. "Most officers are good people trying to do the right thing. That's why this hurts so much. These corrupt few are destroying the trust we work so hard to build with our community." Before leaving, she handed over one last thing, a USB drive containing years of security footage from inside the department. "Everything is here," she said. "Every meeting, every corrupt deal, every time they thought nobody was watching. Use it wisely." As she walked out of the office that day, Officer Thompson knew she had just changed everything. There would be no going back now. The truth she had protected for so long was finally going to come out, and nothing would ever be the same at the department again. When the story broke on Monday morning, it spread like wildfire. The City Times newspaper ran a front-page headline, "POLIC CURUPTAON exposed. Senator's traffic stop uncovers years of cover-ups." Within hours, every major news channel had picked up the story. People couldn't stop talking about it at coffee shops, bus stops, and dinner tables across the city. The police chief's first press conference was a disaster. Standing at the podium, sweating under the bright lights, he tried to dismiss the allegations. "These are isolated incidents," he claimed, his voice shaking. Officer Rayner is a decorated member of our force. But as reporters fired question after question about the evidence, his defense crumbled. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories. A local business owner posted, "They did the same thing to me last year. Nobody believed me then." A teacher wrote about her similar experience. Soon, hundreds of comments poured in, each person feeling brave enough to finally speak up. The city streets filled with peaceful protesters. They weren't angry mobs. They were families, students, business owners, and community leaders. They carried signs reading, "No more cover-ups," and "Justice for all." Even retired police officers joined in, wearing their old badges, showing that good cops supported the truth coming out. Local community centers opened their doors for people to share their stories. An elderly man stood up, his voice trembling. "I've been afraid to drive at night for years because of these officers. Today, for the first time, I feel like someone is listening." His words brought tears to many eyes in the room. The police department's phone lines were flooded. People who had their complaints dismissed years ago called back, demanding their cases be reopened. The department's website crashed from the number of people trying to file new reports about past incidents. Officer Thompson's evidence was impossible to ignore. News channels played clips from the security footage she provided, showing officers destroying complaints. The public was shocked to see how casually these officers had abused their power, thinking nobody would ever know. The mayor called an emergency town hall meeting. The community center was packed, with people standing in the hallways just to listen. When Senator Mitchell showed the video from his traffic stop, you could hear a pin drop. The footage of Officer Rayner's behavior left no room for excuses. "This isn't about one traffic stop," Mitchell told the crowd. "This is about years of abuse that happened right under our noses. Today, we say enough." The applause was deafening. People stood up, cheering, many wiping tears from their eyes. Support came from unexpected places. Good police officers, tired of having their reputation stained by corrupt colleagues, started speaking out. One officer with 20 years of service said in an interview, "We wear this badge to protect people, not to bully them." What these officers did goes against everything we stand for. Local businesses put up signs supporting police reform. A coffee shop owner offered free coffee to anyone who came in to share their story with the investigation team. A law firm offered free legal help to people who wanted to file complaints about past incidents. The police chief's second press conference was very different from the first. "We have failed our community," he admitted, looking straight into the cameras. "Starting today, everything changes." He announced that Officer Rayner and several other officers had been suspended pending a full investigation. Social media played a huge role in spreading the truth. Videos of people sharing their experiences went viral. A clip of an elderly woman describing how these officers had harassed her grandson was watched millions of times. Each share, each like, each comment helped build momentum for change. The city council held emergency meetings to discuss police reform. They weren't just talking about small changes. They were planning a complete overhaul of how the department operated. "We need to rebuild trust," one council member said. "And that starts with admitting our mistakes." As the sun set on another day of peaceful protests, something felt different in the air. People weren't just angry. They were hopeful. For the first time in years, they believed that real change was possible. The truth had finally come out, and there was no going back to the old way of doing things. Senator Mitchell sat in his office late one night, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. On his computer screen was the first draft of what would become the most important legislation of his career, the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act. This wasn't just another law, it was a complete reimagining of how police departments would operate. "We need to get this right," he told his team, rubbing his tired eyes. "Every word matters." The bill they were writing wasn't born from theory or politics. It came from real people's experiences, from thousands of stories that had finally been heard. The proposed changes were bold. Every police car would be required to have cameras that couldn't be turned off. Body cameras would automatically upload footage to a secure server that no officer could access or edit. Most importantly, civilian oversight boards would have real power to investigate complaints. A community meeting was called to discuss the bill. The local high school gym was packed with people from all walks of life. "My daughter wants to be a police officer," one mother said, standing to speak. "I'd want her to join a force that serves everyone equally." Her words captured exactly what the bill was trying to achieve. The police union initially fought back hard. They called the proposed changes unnecessary and harmful to officer safety. But then something unexpected happened. Younger officers started speaking up in favor of reform. "We want to be trusted by our community," one officer said during a public hearing. "These changes will help us do our jobs better." Local business leaders joined the push for reform. They shared stories of customers who avoided certain areas because they feared being harassed by police. "This isn't just about justice," a shop owner explained. "It's about building a city where everyone feels safe to work, shop, and live." The bill included special training requirements. Officers would spend time in the communities they served, not just patrolling them. They would learn about different cultures, attend community events, and build real relationships with residents. "We need to know the people we protect," a police captain said, supporting the changes. Technology played a big part in the reforms. The bill required new computer systems that would track every complaint, every stop, every interaction. No more mysterious disappearing files. No more covered-up incidents. Everything would be transparent and accessible to oversight committees. But the most powerful part of the bill came from Officer Thompson's revelations. A new whistleblower protection program would ensure that good officers could report bad behavior without fear. No more choosing between doing what's right and keeping your job, Mitchell explained to reporters. The bill also addressed the promotion system. No longer would officers like Rayner be rewarded while complaints piled up. Advancement would depend on community feedback, ethical conduct, and a clear record of treating all citizens with respect. During a crucial town hall meeting, a retired judge spoke up. "I've seen too many cases where justice wasn't served," he said. "This bill finally gives us the tools to hold everyone accountable." His words carried extra weight given his years of experience in the legal system. Support for the bill grew stronger each day. Local religious leaders, teachers, business owners, and community organizers all added their voices. They shared stories, suggested improvements, and helped build a law that would work for everyone. The cost of implementing these changes would be significant. But as one city council member put it, "The cost of doing nothing is far greater." Local businesses even offered to help fund new training programs and community outreach efforts. Mitchell made sure the bill had teeth. Departments that failed to follow the new rules would lose funding. Officers who disabled cameras or hid complaints would face serious consequences. "No more slaps on the wrist," he promised. "Real accountability means real consequences." As the final draft came together, Mitchell thought about that night on the dark road with Officer Rayner. What had started as a frightening abuse of power was turning into something powerful. A chance to fix a broken system and rebuild trust between police and the community they served. 1 year after that fateful traffic stop, Senator Mitchell stood at a podium in front of City Hall. Behind him, a diverse crowd gathered: police officers, community members, activists, and everyday citizens. The Police Accountability and Community Trust Act had passed with overwhelming support, and today they were celebrating its impact. "A year ago, I was standing on the side of a dark road, being harassed by an officer who thought he was above the law," Mitchell began. "Today, I'm standing here watching that same department transform into something we can all be proud of." The crowd erupted in applause. The changes were visible everywhere. New police cars drove by, their multiple cameras clearly visible. Officers walked their beats in pairs, stopping to chat with shop owners and residents. The atmosphere had shifted from fear to friendship, from suspicion to support. Officer Rayner and several other corrupt officers had faced justice. Their trials had made headlines, but what really mattered were the hundreds of victims who finally got to tell their stories in court. "I can hold my head high again," said one man who had been wrongly targeted years ago. His case, like many others, was finally resolved. The police department looked different too. The new chief, a respected officer with a long history of community service, had rebuilt the force from the ground up. Half of the command staff were new faces, chosen for their integrity and commitment to fair policing. "We're not perfect," the chief admitted, "but we're learning and growing every day." Officer Thompson, the whistleblower who risked everything to expose the truth, received a special commendation. She now headed the department's new Internal Affairs Division, ensuring that complaints were handled properly. "Officers stop by my office now to report problems," she said. "They're not afraid anymore." The numbers told a powerful story. Civilian complaints had dropped by 60%. Body camera footage was automatically uploaded and archived. Traffic stops were monitored for patterns of bias. Best of all, community satisfaction with police had reached its highest level in decades. Local businesses reported increased activity in areas that people used to avoid. "I used to close early because customers were scared to come at night," one restaurant owner shared. "Now we're full until midnight, and police officers are some of our regular customers." The training center was transformed. New officers learned alongside community members, understanding the neighborhoods they would serve. "We don't just study law enforcement," explained a trainer. "We study communication, culture, and compassion." The results showed in every interaction on the streets. Mitchell's Law became a model for other cities. Delegations came from across the country to study the changes. "If it can work here, it can work anywhere," became a common phrase. Other states began passing similar reforms, creating a wave of positive change across the nation. The most touching moment came during a community picnic in the park. Children played soccer with off-duty officers, families shared meals together, and former victims of police harassment sat and talked with new officers about building a better future. "This is what healing looks like," observed a community leader. Officer Rayner's old partner, now retired, spoke at a police academy graduation. "I was part of the problem," he admitted to the new recruits. "You have the chance to be part of the solution. Don't waste it." His honest words left a lasting impression on the young officers. The secure computer system that tracked police interactions was working perfectly. Every stop, every complaint, every resolution was recorded and reviewed. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," Mitchell often said, and transparency had indeed cleaned up the department. As the celebration wrapped up, Mitchell looked out at the crowd one last time. He saw old wounds healing, new bridges being built, and hope replacing fear. A young officer walked up to him, extended her hand, and said something that brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you for helping us remember why we chose this job in the first place, to protect and serve everyone, equally and fairly." That dark night on the road had led to something remarkable. Not just the end of corruption, but the beginning of real change. The true victory wasn't just in removing bad officers, but in creating a system where good officers could thrive and communities could trust those sworn to protect them.